Hey, what's up? Pastrami on rye is an absolute monster of a sandwich. Not to mention, it's also a very fun way to eat lunch. So today I'm gonna show you how to make every single part of this sandwich. We're gonna corn the beef, smoke the meat, bake the bread, and make the mustard, all in the pursuit of the absolute perfect deli sandwich. But to get started, we need to travel back 8 days ago or last Friday to corn some beef. To get started, we need to make some beef brine. For that, I've got a 4-quart pot, and into that, I'm gonna measure 125 grams of salt, 50 grams of sugar, 15 grams of pink salt. I will link to this stuff down below if you're interested where I got it. 4 smashed garlics, 8 to 10 grams of black peppercorns, 10 grams of mustard seed, 5 to 6 bay leaves, 10 grams of coriander seed, a small pinch of ground clove, or 4 whole cloves if you've got those, and 1,000 grams or 1 liter of water. Also, I have another 1,000 grams of ice here at the ready, but we will get back to that in just a second. This beef brine is going to go over high heat for about 10 minutes so that I can bring everything in this pot up to a quick simmer to infuse this brine with all of those aromatic spices. While that comes up to a simmer, we're going to talk about the beef part of this corned beef. I have here what is called a flat cut brisket. It's about 6 pounds total, and flat cut means that the point muscle has been taken off. As you can see here, a whole brisket has 2 distinct muscles. It has the point and the flat. The point part of the brisket is really fatty. It's delicious for barbecue, but when I made point only pastrami, it was a little bit too heavy and almost greasy. A total gut bomb. Plus, in general, most people have easier access to flat cut briskets, at least in my part of the world. Feel free to skip this whole DIY corned beef setup, by the way, and buy a nice flavorful pre-corned one like this, and pick up the process in a few minutes when we go to smoke this thing later on. Next, I'm going to cut this brisket flat into 2 equal sized pieces. This is another reason I really prefer the flat over the point. It's way more uniform, and it's going to be perfect for slicing into sandwich slabs. Taking a look back at this brine, it's been simmering for about 10 minutes, and now to cool it off, I'm going to add in that additional 1,000 grams of ice that we had set aside. This ice is the other half of the water that we need to get this brine to the right salinity level, and it's going to help get this very cold very quickly. Now, into a tall-sided food bucket goes my 2 briskets, then I'm going to top that with the cooled down brine. It's about 75 degrees now. And there we go. The lid's going to go on, throw it in the fridge for 7 days. But before we move on, another quick process we need to get rolling 7 days early, and that's the spicy mustard. Into a high-sided quart container, I'm going to measure 100 grams of brown mustard seeds, 100 grams of yellow mustard seeds, 250 grams of white distilled vinegar, 250 grams of water, or preferably even better, domestic beer. That brings some malty sweetness to the mustard, but Lauren is gluten-free and she can't have it, so water it is for me. Behind that, 50 grams of apple cider vinegar, and finally 12 grams of salt. That's going to get stirred up to combine, the lid goes on, and this is going to go on top of the refrigerator for 7 whole days. 7 days later, the mustard seeds have swollen up, they've softened, and their harsh edge has mellowed out. The first step towards spicy deli-style mustard is to turn this into a simple grainy mustard. For that, I've got my immersion blender, and I'm going to puree this for 4 to 5 minutes until every mustard seed is well cracked and everything is starting to become a nice rustic puree. This type of mustard isn't possible without doing a long soak at room temp. You could cook the seeds and that would soften them faster, but you would also neutralize a lot of the natural mustard spice in the process. Once this mustard is pureed, but it's still a little bit coarse like this, we're going to give it a little taste. Ooh! That's spicy. Now, this mustard is perfectly usable as is, and it will mellow a bit as it sits in the fridge, which is a good thing. It's very spicy at this point. But to make it into a spreadable deli-style sandwich mustard, we need to take it a step further. So grab a blender, and into that measure 150 grams of cooked mustard paste. To make that, I measured 50 grams of water, 50 grams of white distilled vinegar, and 50 grams of dried mustard powder into a little baby saucepan, whisked it all up to combine over high heat, brought it to a simmer, and cooked it for about 4 to 5 minutes until things are nice and thick like this. This paste is going to help thicken our sandwich mustard, and it's also going to help mellow out the spice of that grainy stuff that we just made. On top of that paste, into the blender goes 225 grams of our DIY grainy mustard. The rest of this is going to stay in my fridge for pretty much forever. It's a beautiful pantry item. On top of that goes 75 grams of water, 75 grams of white distilled vinegar, 8 grams of salt, and finally 2 grams of turmeric. I'm going to spin all of this up on high for about 2 minutes until a nice smooth puree has formed like this. It's saucy and spicy, it's sour, and it's super fresh. It's going to be perfect for a rich, salty beef sandwich on old world style rye bread. We're going to transfer this over to a pint container and move it to the refrigerator to cool off and to continue to set up. Back to the blender. The next major step on our way to pastrami is rubbing and smoking our 7 days corned meat. Into a blender or spice grinder, I'm going to measure 50 grams each of whole black peppercorn and whole coriander. I gave both these a quick toast in a saucepan like this to wake them up a little bit. On top of that goes 50 grams of salt and 50 grams of sugar. I like to add in a little bit of garlic powder here, like 10 grams, and a little bit of chili flake, like maybe maybe 3 to 4 grams. And now I'm gonna grind this on a high speed for about 5 to 10 seconds until we have something like this. It's coarse, it's very pungent and super aromatic. It's gonna be a great rub for this beef. Speaking of beef, these flat cut briskets have been brining in my fridge for the last 7 days. Now we're gonna rub them and then smoke them. To get this rub on there, we're gonna lay down about a half cup or so onto a sheet tray, and then I'm gonna lay the 2 halves of briskets on top of that. I'm gonna add another half cup of the cure on the top side, rub it all around, and just do your best to make sure that you get cure all over everything. I like mine very peppery, so I go pretty seriously on this stuff, but feel free to dial it back if you're a little bit sensitive to spice. Once that's rubbed up, we're gonna take these out to the smoker. For that, of course, we're using the king of the low-tech smokers himself, the Big Chief. I've got this thing rolling with a full pan of soaked applewood chips, and I'm gonna load all these beefs in here with some distance from each other to let that smoke cover it all. I'm gonna be smoking these for about 6 hours total, and halfway through, we're gonna come back and flip these beefs to get more even smoke distribution. And a quick note, my smoker needs to be re-chipped every hour, pretty much on the hour. So at this point, I'm on 3 rounds of chips. 6 hours later, I'm gonna pull these pastrami's off the smoker and bring them inside. As you can see, they're dark, they're just a little bit barky from that slow, dry smoke over the last 6 hours. At this point, it's midnight and it's late, and I'm at a real crossroads. I could throw these in the fridge right now and finish cooking them tomorrow and have pastrami sometime around like 8 p.m., or I could roll them overnight in the oven and use all that passive cooking time to wake up to pastrami on Saturday morning. And I clearly would rather have cooked pastrami sooner than later, so once these are triple wrapped with foil, I'm going to throw them into my oven that's been preheated to 300 degrees Fahrenheit or 148 degrees Celsius and cook these slowly overnight for about 8 to 9 hours. The next morning, or about 7 hours later, the pastrami still needs a little bit more time to finish up. So I'm going to get started on the rye part of this pastrami on rye. Into the bowl of my stand mixer, I'm going to measure 265 grams of warm water, 300 grams of ripe Polish. I mixed this 12 hours ago right after I put the beef on the smoker. This is 150 grams of room temperature water, a small pinch of yeast, like 30 granules or so, and then 150 grams of all-purpose flour. I stirred it up to combine with a spoon, popped a lid on it, and let it ferment on my counter for 12 hours. Now, all of that is going to go into this bowl. On top of that goes 4 grams of instant yeast, 335 grams of all-purpose flour, 85 grams of dark rye flour, and 17 grams of salt. I'm going to throw the dough hook attachment on this thing and then start the mix on low speed to get everything combined for about 3 minutes. From there, I'm going to turn it up to high speed and continue to mix for another roughly 4 minutes or so. Rye flour has a different gluten situation than regular wheat flour due to a polysaccharide called protozoans. To put it simply, doughs with a decent amount of rye flour in them will always be stickier and denser than their all-wheat counterparts. So a firm mechanical mix with a stand mixer helps us get a more reliably strong dough, in my opinion. After we've mixed this dough for about 4 minutes or so on high speed, the dough should be clearing the bowl like this. Then we're going to add in 8 grams of whole caraway seeds, and they're going to go in at the end of this mix so they don't shred the gluten in the dough apart. And after a few seconds of mixing to incorporate the caraway, take a look. We've got a well-developed, strong dough. I just love the color of rye doughs. You could mix this dough by hand, by the way, and check any one of my last 5 bread videos. I mix all of those by hand. I want to give you guys a little bit of an alternative method with the stand mixer. Now, this is going to get flipped into a lightly oiled medium bowl, covered, and I'll check back in 30 minutes. After that 30 minutes, of course, comes a strength building fold. Pull it out as far as it will stretch, fold it over, do that 4 times. If you've been watching any of my content lately, you know the drill. We fold these things and then we grab a grip of the dough and slap and fold our way to a nice, taut little ball. This usually takes about 10 of those slap and folds. The lid goes back on and we check back in 30 minutes to do the exact same thing. I'm going to spare the details for round 2, but total we need 2 rounds of folding 30 minutes apart. The lid goes on and now we're going to continue rising this for 60 more minutes. After that 60 minutes or 2 hours total of bulk fermentation, we've got a strong, gassy boy ready to be shaped into a loaf. Since we're not dividing this dough into smaller loaf pieces and it's relatively dry and strong, we can skip the pre-shape step and move right into final shaping. For that, I like to grab the bottom third of the ball here and pull it out and fold it up all the way to the top. Now, grab the sides on the bottom half and pull those out. We're going to fold one over the other, kind of like a tri-fold brochure. That looks good. Next, grab the top third, pull that out, and then fold that down about halfway. Then I'm gonna crisscross these from top to bottom all the way down, probably about 4 times total. That's gonna create more even tension and make sure this loaf is evenly distributed side to side. Now, all that's left is to roll this up into a tube. I'm gonna go back to a wider shot here so you can see me rolling this away from myself and tucking the bread back into itself with each roll. Everyone has their own method out there that kind of differs slightly, but this is what works for me. Watch it a few times and see if you can replicate it. Now, for a bit of fun technique, I'm gonna proof this little 1 kilo rye batard in a linen cloth called a couche. It's a great tool for supporting loaves as they proof. I use it for baguettes all the time. It's just something kind of fun and different for you guys to check out. I'm gonna lightly flour the couche, then the loaf, then I'm gonna grab this thing and flip it seam side up like this, and then I'm gonna gently lay it into the couche and roll up the sides to support it as it proofs. Look how snug that guy is in there. Okay, I've moved the loaf out of the way for now so we can check on this meat. It's been in the oven for 9 hours total at 300 degrees overnight, as a reminder. I did check this at 7 hours and 8 hours to see how it was rolling, but it did need more time. I know what you're thinking. Hey, Bri, how do I know if it needs more time? Well, when you poke it and pull it with a fork, it should feel obviously tender, almost shreddable, but not quite yet. We need this beef to stay together on the sandwich, but we don't want it falling apart. This stuff looks good though, so we're gonna wrap it up, set it aside while we bake our loaf. This rye bread has been proofing on the counter in the couche for 45 minutes at room temperature, and it's looking perfect. The way I know it's well proofed is when I poke the loaf, it holds onto that poke briefly and then sends it back out slowly like this. As soon as the pastrami came out of my oven, I did throw in my Challenger bread pan and turn the oven up to 500 degrees to preheat for 30 minutes. Now, to load this bread in the oven, we're gonna generously hit the pan here with some semolina flour to prevent stickage. Then we're gonna roll the proofed loaf over onto the seam side and place that loaf seam side down into the pan. I'm gonna score it 5 to 6 times to give it that classic Jewish deli rye look. The lid's gonna go on, and then that's gonna go into the oven. This time, turn the oven down to 480 degrees for 18 minutes. After that 18 minutes, the pan comes out, the lid comes off, and wow, beautiful oven spring. I love all these separate scores. It just looks amazing. Now the pan's gonna go back in the oven, uncovered this time, and I'm gonna turn the oven down to 465 degrees to finish baking. After about 25 more minutes of baking, it's time to pull this thing out. I make sure to tap the bottom to hear a nice deep hollow sound. That means that there's not any wet underbaked bread in there. And take a look. This is a classic Polish caraway rye, and for me, it's the natural match for a king-size pastrami on rye sandwich. It's perfumed with the exotic caraway seed, it's toasty, and of course, that Polish has brought that signature boozy yeast aroma. All that's left now is to slice big dog slabs of this pastrami for the sandwich. That brisket flat is definitely on the leaner side, but the week-long brine, the gentle smoke, and the overnight slow roast all team up to give us incredibly tender, juicy, salty, peppery, smoky pastrami at home. Making this sandwich was a lot of work, there's no doubt about that, but outside of Montreal or New York or maybe Los Angeles, you really can't get something like this anywhere else. So enjoy your hard work and know that you're one of the few lucky people to have something as good as this in your hands. Let's eat this thing. Before I get out of here, if you guys like this video and you enjoy my content in general, but you're not subscribed, please consider hitting that subscribe button. It goes a long way in helping us be seen by other people who also might like these videos. As always, guys, thank you so much for your time and attention. Thank you for sticking around to the end, and we'll see you next time.